The incident that occurred in the summer of 2012 in Millville, Pennsylvania, USA, captured the attention of not only the local community, but also the entire state for a long time. Many probably still recall the tragic demise of 46-year-old Frank Spencer. What is most shocking is not just that a vibrant man died in the prime of his life, but the dreadful and absurd circumstances of his passing. As a result of the events that unfolded in the family of an auto parts dealer, one person lost his life. His ex-wife ended up in prison, and her father is on the run. This story illustrates how, in a blink of an eye, a close person can become the most alien and hostile. Meeting Frank. Frank was born on November 10, 1965, to Cyrus and Madeline Spencer in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. From a young age, he was fond of active games and sports, which gave him a robust physique and spirit. In high school, he was recognized as an outstanding member of the wrestling team. The young man had a curious mind and dreamed of continuing the family business. Therefore, after graduating from high school in 1984, he enrolled in a local university. He successfully completed his course of study in 1988, and after his father's death, he became the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts and Used Cars, the Beloveds. A significant event occurred in the young man's life in 1997. Fate brought Maria Sanuti and Frank Spencer together. They were immediately drawn to each other. The woman was noted for her fiery temperament and bold character. Her excessive emotionality was captivating. Frank's friend, Paul Siciliano, remembered that his buddy always liked the wild ones. There was something wild about him, too, so when they met, they had fun, he recalled. However, not everyone was pleased with the relationship, especially the lovers' parents. Rumor has it that Anthony, Rocco Franklin, Maria's father, was associated with a gang and even had a reputation as a hired criminal. He took an immediate dislike to his daughter's suitor. For some time, he even tried to obstruct their union. The Spencer family was also not thrilled with Frank's choice. For this reason, the couple eloped and rented an apartment away from their families. To maintain contact with the young people, their families were forced to accept their feelings. Family life. Soon, Maria and Frank got married. After some time, they had children, first a boy and then a girl. After that, the family moved into a new home. During this time, Frank owned the auto parts business and sponsored racing cars. He worked hard to provide everything necessary for his family. For the head of the household, his children became a top priority and motivation in life. Initially, Maria tried to manage the children and household chores. However, later, despite her law degree, she began coaching her daughter's soccer team. According to friends, unlike her husband, she was not as warm to the marriage. She seemed all over the place and a bit out of this world. Domestic chores and responsibilities did not interest her. What really worried her was money. She greatly enjoyed spending what Frank earned. But what was more striking was her coldness towards the children. Gradually, Mrs. Spencer's behavior led to problems in the marriage. Her husband became dissatisfied with her selfishness and eccentricity. He felt that, having become a mother, she should have matured and thought of others. However, Maria did not change. In 2006, the man initiated a divorce. He was finally tired of the constant scandals and inappropriate behavior of his wife. Sometimes she behaved so unreasonably that Frank feared for the children's health. At that time, the idea of divorce seemed to be the only correct solution. However, after deciding to separate, the relationship between the former spouses became even more strained. The confrontation. Spencer wanted to keep the children with him. He didn't trust his ex-wife and was convinced that she couldn't properly care for them. Not everyone in his circle agreed with his stance. For example, his friend Ron asserted that for the children's normal development, both parents were necessary. He strongly recommended that his friend negotiate with Maria and share custody equally. Apparently, Frank knew more than his friends did, so he continued to insist on sole custody. In retaliation, the woman did the same. Moreover, She was counting on substantial child support payments. This conflict intensified over time. More than once, due to his ex-wife's erratic behavior, the man had to call the police. The woman would attack him and the children. However, not everyone believed this. In 2008, an incident occurred that confirmed the main character's words. Following a scuffle with her former mother-in-law, Maria was arrested near her child's school. The issue was that she came to pick up the girl, but Frank's mother tried to stop her. It turned out that the woman's decision was justified since they had another arrangement that day. But at the last minute, Maria decided to change it. After the fight, she took the child and put her in the car but forgot to buckle her up. On the way, police officers stopped her car and assessed her actions as a threat to the child's life and health. Consequently, Maria began having problems. She was charged with disorderly conduct. Additionally, Frank accused his ex-wife of stalking him. He claimed that she had repeatedly followed him. For this reason, she was charged with another crime. However, the prosecution could not prove a threat to the child's life. Therefore, the authorities agreed to drop the charge in exchange for her guilty plea to disorderly conduct and stalking. Ultimately, Maria admitted her guilt and was fined $600. But even this event did not make the woman reconsider her behavior. Quite the opposite occurred. The ex-wife became more embittered. After this case, Frank's acquaintances and relatives increasingly heard complaints from him. He reported that Maria had escalated to threats, and her stalking continued. Later, some of Mrs. Spencer's colleagues confessed that she had repeatedly said how much she hated Frank and was ready to end his life. Because of this, one of her co-workers jokingly nicknamed her the Black Widow. At the same time, the man tried to keep calm and smooth over the rough edges. He repeatedly tried to talk to his former beloved, but she did not cease. The hero of the story even began documenting all conflicts. He did not want to cause her legal trouble, but he did it in case something bad happened. He just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria clearly went too far. Escalation of the situation. By 2009, the Spencers' divorce process seemed endless. All this time, the children were with their mother. Frank tried not to despair and eventually met a woman named Julie Dent. Soon, the pursuer learned about her ex-husband's new relationship. According to her words, she didn't care that Frank was dating Julie. What bothered her most was that the rival had found a connection with the children. However, the man thought otherwise. He knew that the cause of all the troubles was his ex-wife's intense jealousy. After this event, Maria became completely enraged. In February 2009, she sent a voice message to Julie, warning her not to come near her children. However, the situation truly escalated when the main character's father-in-law was released from prison. After 5 years of incarceration for fraud, the criminal's reputation had only worsened. For Frank, this meant more trouble since he knew the fierce temperament of his former relative well. Many believed that Maria had inherited her character from her father. At this time, Spencer's circle noted that he had become pensive and worried, and not without reason, the first crime. After Rocco's release, a robbery occurred at Frank's office. Important documents that could have influenced the divorce proceedings were stolen. The next day, Maria called her ex-husband and mentioned that she found a trash bag with interesting contents on her porch. Frank understood what she was referring to and advised her to return what was taken. Additionally, he reported the break-in to the police. However, proving anyone's involvement in the incident was unsuccessful. According to detectives, no traces of the perpetrators were found. Nevertheless, everyone understood Maria and her father's interest in committing the crime. The investigation also considered the ex-wife as a suspect. Ultimately, the case investigation was discontinued. At the same time, thanks to the efforts of law enforcement, Maria handed over the acquired documents to the owner. Most likely, they simply contained nothing substantial that could be used in court. Thus, the lack of evidence was perceived by Spencer's pursuers as a license for impunity. the situation continued to escalate, the limit of patience. Subsequently, threats from the former beloved followed on social media. She was still discontent that the children were communicating with Julie. Unlike her, the new partner was calm and balanced. She enjoyed spending time with her beloved and his kids. She tried not to interfere in the complicated relationships of the former spouses. However, she was extremely outraged that in her quest for revenge, Maria forgot about her parental responsibilities. The disputes continued until 2010. At that time, Frank's patience reached its breaking point. The man could not stand it any longer and turned to law enforcement. He asked the police officers to assess the behavior of his ex-wife and provided their correspondence. It clearly contained veiled threats. However, Maria claimed that this was just her way of communicating and that she meant nothing reprehensible by it. Once again, it was not possible to prove the woman's guilt since her warnings sounded vague. Unfortunately, this time too, the pursuer remained unpunished. Fires. In January 2010, another misfortune awaited the man. The couple planned to go on a romantic trip to the Caribbean islands. By strange coincidence, on the night before the trip, a fire broke out at Frank's mother's house. Fortunately, no one was harmed. However, all property was destroyed by fire and smoke. Witnesses claimed that a car, driven by Maria and accompanied by neighbors and acquaintances, pulled up to the house. The woman behind the wheel watched the scene with a smile before driving away. After the fire service extinguished the flames, a dog belonging to one of Frank's children was found among the ashes. Tragically, it did not survive that fateful night. Spencer was forced to call the police again. No one believed the fire was an accident. This time, Maria's actions had gone too far. It was clear she would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. Nevertheless, no evidence of deliberate arson was found, as it likely was destroyed by the fire. Thus, the fire was deemed an accident. After this, the frenzied woman sent Frank a message in which she subtly gloated, writing about how karma had caught up with him, and for her ruined life, he might face yet more repercussions. Later, the pursuer began sending similar messages to Julie. With the police's inaction, Maria's audacity grew. She became so emboldened that she could afford public threats against her ex and his new partner. A few months later, a fire occurred at Julie's house. This time, the situation could have been much worse. She was home when the fire started. She managed to escape by jumping off the porch roof. Miraculously, she was unharmed, which could not be said for her home. It was not completely destroyed, but was rendered uninhabitable. Consequently, Frank invited his beloved to move in with him. Naturally, the young couple feared this would only anger his ex further, but they had no other options. At the same time, the cause of the fire was being investigated. The similar modus operandi made it clear whose handiwork it was. Since the woman's home was in a different county, the couple hoped for an impartial police investigation. However, even this time, they were of no help. Due to the lack of evidence, the fire could again be dismissed as a bizarre accident. Nevertheless, Julie was determined and appealed to higher authorities. This moved the investigation forward. Unexpectedly, flares were found in the applicant's backyard. One was damaged and lay nearby in the grass. Detectives also found another similar one, which apparently had caused the fire. Additionally, experts determined that the steps on the home's terrace had been doused with a flammable mixture. Eventually, after all inspections and expertise, arson was recognized as the cause of the fire. However, as before, no perpetrator was identified. Due to the lack of direct evidence, the potential criminals again evaded punishment. A cold summer, 2012. In June 2012, Frank and Julie decided to break up. In reality, it was a cunning plan to briefly lull Maria's vigilance. Then followed the final breakup of the Spencers. Unfortunately, the long-awaited peace did not come. Just a few weeks later, Frank was found deceased. On July 3rd, Joe, a friend of the main character, decided to visit his friend. There had been no word from him lately, which surprised no one. The man had recently gone through a divorce and wanted some solitude. However, there was urgent business. The friends had spent many years karting with their children. Their team was in the midst of a big series they hoped to win, but unexpected breakdowns could ruin the desired result. Since Frank was not responding to phone calls, Joe decided to visit him personally. Arriving at the cottage, the man grew anxious. The front door was slightly ajar, and there were stains near the threshold. His fears were confirmed as soon as he entered the house. His friend lay on the floor, lifeless. Frank's face was so serene it seemed as though he had finally found the peace he desired. The man circled the body and noticed dried blood in the ear. Without hesitation, the accidental witness called emergency services. When the news of the incident spread around the district, everyone knew who was behind such a monstrous crime. Nevertheless, it was up to the detectives to sort everything out on their own. Investigation. Experts who arrived at the scene found large pools of blood and several extensive drag marks. Additionally, a clear shoe print was discovered on the floor, and bloodied gloves were found in the kitchen. These physical pieces of evidence were sent for analysis. Subsequent investigation revealed that the bloody shoe print matched the model and size worn by Rocco, Maria's father. Furthermore, skin particles from Frank's ex-wife were found inside the examined gloves. It was known that the woman had not lived with the deceased for over a year, so the gloves with fresh DNA could not have been left in the house by chance. All evidence pointed to the involvement of both in the crime committed. Soon, the suspects were detained. Autopsy and ballistics analysis determined that Frank Spencer had been shot with two different types of weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper's nest approximately 115 feet from the house. The bullet passed through his hand and penetrated his chest, striking a vital artery. The shot was fatal. However, the attackers did not stop there. They dragged the poor man inside, where a final, controlling shot was fired into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. By that time, the man was already deceased. Therefore, the final shot was seen as an act of revenge. It was clear that the shooter harbored hatred toward his victim. Consequently, police speculated that Rocco fired from the rifle, while Maria finished what was started. Additionally, it was discovered that alongside the crime, Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, exposing Rocco and Maria. By reviewing traffic cameras, Spencer's car was spotted on a federal highway, moving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. Unfortunately, it was not possible to identify the driver. Eventually, the vehicle was found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's home and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were discovered inside the car. Regarding the victim's dog, it was found 2 days after the incident, having wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Attendees immediately realized that the well-groomed Weimaraner had an owner. Thanks to a microchip, the dog was returned to Spencer's mother. It turned out that Frank had gotten a new pet for his children after the fire. This fortunate discovery helped clarify some aspects and effectively expose the crime. According to the investigation, the criminals took the dog when they fled the scene. On their way home, Rocco stopped, and during this time, attracted by nearby food smells, the dog managed to escape. Subsequently, it ended up at a house where a wedding ceremony was taking place. This allowed detectives to prove that Rocco's phone pinged near the celebration site on the day of the crime, while his residence in Harrisburg was 12 miles away, contradicting his assertion that he was at home. Likely, it was Maria's idea to take the dog to the children, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Rocco admitted that his son-in-law had repeatedly asked him for help and had visited him the day before his death, which explains the traces found at the crime scene. However, Rocco could not explain the presence of a blood pool. His statements sounded insincere, and no one could confirm whether the men got along well or otherwise. Rocco also confessed that Frank had given him the vehicle to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints in the victim's home. By doing so, he essentially admitted to being at the crime scene the day before. Searches were organized at the homes of Rocco and his daughter to find the crime weapons, but the seasoned criminal knew how to dispose of firearms, so neither the rifle nor the revolver was found. Ultimately, it would not have been difficult for him to dispose of the crime weapon. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She insisted that the glove ended up in her ex's house by accident, possibly moved by the children on one of the days. In the end, the suspects were released home. However, detectives did not close the case and continued to gather necessary evidence. Meanwhile, Frank's friend, Derek Reed, managed to talk to the former friend during a school football match. During their conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before his death was her face. Her statement sounded odd. The investigation received heightened attention from the state's attorney general, who was extremely upset with the authorities' indifference to Frank's reports and statements. Moreover, the police received numerous complaints about their incompetence. An internal investigation was unavoidable. Unfortunately, it was not possible to prove the officers' negligent attitude towards their duty. According to the police, much information provided by Spencer lacked solid evidence, and the only person who could confirm or refute the officers' words was deceased. The public and the victims' relatives were extremely outraged that their petitions yielded no results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt not only in the crime, but also in stalking and other offenses committed earlier. In 2013, a major interrogation was organized. At the same time, Maria and Rocco continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to accusations of providing false testimony. Prosecutors believed that the suspects arrived at Spencer's house together. They chose not to use their own transport to avoid drawing attention, thus they fled the scene in the victim's car. In late 2014, Maria was arrested again. By this time, Rocco had managed to flee. After the last interrogation, he boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. The investigation interpreted the man's behavior as flight and proof of guilt. For 11 months, the criminal was elusive. Eventually, he was apprehended in Buenos Aires, Argentina, after being arrested by local police and fighting extradition to the U.S. However, the criminal's efforts were in vain, and he was sent back to his home country. Justice. In the fall of 2015, Maria's trial took place. She continued to deny her guilt and shifted the blame to her father. The accused claimed she loved Frank and never wished for his demise. However, numerous witnesses exposed her true character, recounting long-term threats, stalking, and arson. The trial lasted just over a week. In the end, the jury delivered their verdict. They found her guilty on all counts, including deprivation of life, arson, burglary, providing false statements, conspiracy, and making threats. Mrs. Spencer was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole plus an additional 50 years. Eyewitnesses claimed that Maria smiled constantly during the trial. "I didn't end his life, so I tried to stay optimistic," she explained in a later interview. A few years later, trials began for Rocco. He was extremely displeased with his daughter's accusations. The defendant insisted he was merely helping her but was against violence. It was Maria who insisted on the crime. However, physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony Franklin was found guilty of deprivation of life, as well as robbery and arson. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 years. Upon sentencing, the 77-year-old man blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing the judge. Years later, Rocco sought a retrial, claiming his defense attorney had been ineffective, which led to his conviction. Maria also attempted to appeal her case. However, both father and daughter's efforts were fruitless. Every divorce comes with negative consequences. For some, it manifests in financial difficulties and emotional turmoil, leading to changes in social status and lifestyle. Over time, things typically settle into place. For Frank Spencer, however, such a breakup proved fatal. It must be said that the relationship he was in was horrendous. The man had harbored a serpent at his bosom and signed his own death warrant. The West family case, the mysterious demise of a glamorous housewife. Have you ever wondered what lies beneath the facade of a seemingly perfect family? Psychologists claim that the more people try to portray an impeccable, happy, and prosperous family life, the bigger the underlying relationship issues. Typically, such individuals are deeply concerned with societal perceptions, constantly seeking approval and validation. Inside these perfect family units, resentments can accumulate over the years, often erupting in unexpected and drastic ways. The West family appeared to everyone as a strong, happy, and well-off unit, and they probably were, until they weren't. The couple had been married for 14.5 years, raising a daughter together, and never once gave anyone reason to suspect any difficulties in their marriage. That was until the early morning of January 13, 2018, when 42-year-old Mrs. West was found deceased near her own home. This convoluted story raised more questions than answers. The incident seemed like both a bizarre accident and a calculated homicide. Despite the case being closed and the convicted serving their sentence, many have sided with the alleged perpetrator rather than the deceased victim. To understand why, we need to delve into the West family's history from the beginning and unravel the rumors about the double life of the late housewife that had been circulating for years. Who was Caitlyn West? Caitlyn Dawn West, née Martin, was born on February 15, 1975, in the quaint town of Davie, Florida. The only child of Nancy and Jonathan Martin, she grew up in a humble and modest family environment. As a child, she yearned for a younger sibling, a dream unfulfilled due to her mother's health issues. Perhaps this is why Caitlyn was overly attached to dolls, treating them like living beings, singing to them and cradling them. In school, Caitlyn was known for her beauty and sociability, actively participating in sports and dance. However, during her teenage years, signs of bipolar affective disorder began to emerge, characterized by depression and anxiety, alternating with periods of hyperthymia, persistently elevated mood, and motor agitation. Unfortunately, her parents didn't notice her condition until later. By then, Caitlyn had turned to alcohol to manage her emotions. It was only during treatment for alcoholism that the root cause of her problems was identified. By her 20s, Caitlyn overcame alcohol dependency. Managing her bipolar disorder was more challenging, necessitating several potent medications that caused complex drug interactions and side effects. Eventually, the disorder was brought under control, although she had to continue medication until her untimely death. Caitlyn longed for marriage, a family, and children, but her personal life was fraught with difficulties, possibly due to her psychological disorder and alcohol issues. Yet, the attractive blonde had many admirers, being the life of the party and always enjoying the spotlight. In her youth, Caitlyn aspired to model, attending castings and experimenting with different looks. She was particularly fascinated by the iconic 50s movie star and style symbol, Marilyn Monroe. She watched Monroe's films repeatedly, collected posters, and emulated her style and image. It's worth noting that Caitlyn bore a certain resemblance to her idol, a fact she proudly capitalized on and cherished. Though Caitlyn's dream of becoming a famous model didn't materialize, her photos were frequently published in local magazines, earning her some recognition, a fan base, and occasional recognition on the streets of her hometown. At 28, she finally met the man she would start a family with, who was William West. William Jeffrey West, known mostly by his middle name, was born in 1970 in Alabama, into a typical family. From an early age, he dreamt of a career in the military or law enforcement. A diligent student and an active sports enthusiast, he was robust, fit, and incredibly focused. In the early 1990s, William joined the U.S. military, serving initially as a military police officer. His dedication led him to become a military recruiter, responsible for enlisting individuals into the Army and Navy. Ultimately, he rose to head a recruitment division. In total, William devoted 2 decades of his life to military service. Simultaneously with his military career, William chose to pursue higher education. He earned a bachelor's degree in public relations from the University of South Carolina. He continued his studies in criminal justice and disaster and emergency management, eventually earning a master's degree. William was intelligent, composed, and goal-oriented, yet modest and somewhat introverted. He preferred quiet gatherings over loud parties and generally shunned the spotlight. He married young and was a father to 2 children, known as a devoted family man and a responsible parent. Upon retiring from the military, William became a corporal in the police department of a university town. He was entrusted with ensuring the safety of the campus community, approaching his duties with seriousness and responsibility. Although he was issued a service firearm, he never had to use it throughout his career. The odd but happy couple. Caitlyn and Jeffrey's paths crossed in the mid-2000s. At the time, Jeffrey, still serving in the military, was married to his first wife. It seemed unlikely that the stern, quiet military man had anything in common with the flamboyant, bold, attention-loving blonde. Yet they felt an instant mutual attraction. Their 5-year age gap, Jeffrey's existing marriage, and Caitlyn's periodic struggles with alcohol, which she continually fought, were not deterrents to their relationship. Jeffrey soon filed for divorce to be with his new love, and in less than 5 months of meeting, they surprisingly tied the knot in a Las Vegas chapel. In 2005, the couple welcomed their only child together, a daughter named Lola. They settled in the quiet town of Calera, Alabama, Jeffrey's home state, in a custom-built, cozy home. Caitlyn personally designed their bedroom, adorning it with portraits of her idol, Marilyn Monroe. Neighbors spoke highly of the Wests, describing them as a happy couple, despite being complete opposites. Caitlyn always strived to look stunning and attractive, with bold makeup, stylish hairdos, and Barbie-like outfits. She thrived on catching people's glances and loved compliments, always appearing cheerful and smiling. Jeffrey, in contrast, seemed overshadowed by her presence, appearing reserved, serious, and highly disciplined, a reflection of his long military career. The double life of a blonde, from homemaker to kitty cat. Despite her efforts and striking looks, Caitlyn couldn't carve out a successful modeling career. After marriage and the birth of her daughter, she focused on creating a cozy home and raising her child. Yet the mundane life of a homemaker wasn't enough. She craved attention and recognition. With the rise of social media in the late 2000s, she began actively posting pictures online. Initially, these were harmless Barbie or Marilyn Monroe-themed photos, but gradually, they became more provocative and daring. Close sources say her husband not only didn't mind her new hobby, but often played the role of her personal photographer. It seemed harmless, and eventually became a lucrative venture for Caitlyn through paid subscriptions. They bought a selection of ready-made seafood dishes from a popular local restaurant, a bottle of fine brandy, and absinthe from the supermarket, along with aromatic candles Caitlyn picked from a nearby store to set a romantic mood. Captured on surveillance cameras at each location, they appeared happy and carefree, smiling and joking, with no hint of the impending tragedy. Returning home with their purchases, the couple enjoyed their dinner and indulged in the alcoholic beverages. Caitlyn, who had intermittently battled alcohol dependency, transformed under its influence into her online alter ego, Kitty Cat. She requested Jeff conduct a hot photo session, first in lingerie and then without any clothes. Jeff, not opposed, took several revealing shots, which were posted on Caitlyn's private Only for Fans profile by around 10 p.m. However, the romantic evening that was supposed to end in a passionate night soon turned into a nightmare, leading to a tragic outcome. Body on the road. Early on the morning of January 13th, around 5 a.m., a young neighbor of the Wests was on her way to work. The sun hadn't risen yet, but it was light enough outside. As she passed the Wests' house, something caught her eye, but it took her a moment to realize what it was. Slowing down, she soon noticed an almost fully unclothed woman lying motionless on the road. She also thought she saw someone standing on the doorstep of the house, who quickly vanished into the shadows upon noticing her. During questioning, she couldn't definitively say whether this person entered the house or ran off down the street. Startled and unsure of what to do, the young woman hesitated to approach the body. She returned home, informed her parents, and they collectively called emergency services to report the grim discovery. At the operator's request, while waiting for help to arrive, they reluctantly approached the woman on the ground, recognized as Mrs. West, and checked for a pulse. Tragically, there was none. Her body was cold and already showing signs of rigor mortis. Caitlyn was found face down, her body mostly on the sidewalk, wearing only a bright pink bra top. A pool of blood had formed under her head, and nearby was a bottle of absinthe, some of its contents spilled on the road with bloodstains on the bottle. A short distance away lay her smashed smartphone. Since it was a quiet residential area, there were no other witnesses during the night. Thus, the time gap between the last sighting of the West's car around 8:30 p.m. and 5 a.m., when the neighbor discovered Caitlyn's lifeless body, remains a mystery, likely witnessed only by her husband. What's Mr. West hiding? Detective Michael Melhoff, one of the first to arrive at the scene, headed to the house where the woman's body was found. A man answered the door, appearing somewhat anxious but claiming ignorance of the situation. When asked about his wife's whereabouts, he said he had just woken up and didn't find her in bed. The detective then asked him to step outside, informing him that a woman's body, identified by neighbors as Caitlyn West, was found near the house. The man, throwing on a jacket, followed the officer and confirmed that the deceased was indeed his wife. However, Jeff's reaction was unusually calm. He did not rush to the body with tears or screams. When questioned about his whereabouts and activities during the night, Mr. West stated he had slept soundly as they had been drinking the previous evening. Asked what he thought had happened, he merely shrugged, suggesting it might have been an unfortunate accident. Mr. West also shared that his wife suffered from bipolar affective disorder, requiring medication, and struggled with alcohol, behaving erratically when intoxicated. He mentioned that she would sometimes jump on their backyard trampoline, occasionally missing it and injuring herself. A search of the house revealed no signs of a struggle or violence. 2 plates with leftover food, 2 glasses, and a half-empty brandy bottle were on the kitchen table. Her high heels, captured in her last pictures, lay under the table, and underwear matching the bra she was wearing when found was on the floor. However, several blood-stained napkins in the trash and an open bottle of cleaner raised questions. That day, Jeffrey was taken into custody as the main and sole suspect in the case. Chronology of events. Describing the last evening spent with his wife, Jeffrey noted that she drank heavily, which he greatly disliked. After the revealing photo session, he hoped they would move to the bedroom for a more intimate setting. He stepped away to shower for a few minutes and returned to find his wife still sitting at the table, drinking absinthe straight from the bottle and texting someone on her phone. Jeff was angered by this, and his requests to put away the gadget were ignored by Caitlyn. He tried to snatch the phone from her hands, leading to a minor scuffle during which he accidentally elbowed his wife's face, causing a few drops of blood to appear from her nose. According to him, this was the blood the police found on the discarded napkins. Mr. West eventually took the phone from his wife and, opening the door, hurled it into the darkness. He claimed that after this, he turned around and went to bed, convinced that his spouse would soon calm down and join him. He allegedly remained unaware of how events unfolded further until the police knocked on his door asking about Caitlyn. He speculated that his wife might have gone outside to find her phone, which she rarely parted with, taking the absinthe bottle with her to finish it. He also suggested that she might have fallen, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and froze to death, or that someone might have attacked her. Mr. West couldn't explain why Mrs. West was without the bottom part of her enticing pink lingerie set, or why she went to look for her phone in just a bra without putting on any outerwear hanging near the entrance. He attributed such behavior to alcohol intoxication. Evidence and the main theory. The suspect's story seemed suspicious and inconsistent. He claimed to be too intoxicated to remember certain details, leaving the investigation to piece together the sequence of events. The evidence was scarce, and there were no witnesses. The autopsy determined that the cause of death for the 42-year-old woman was blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted with the absinthe bottle found nearby, compounded by hypothermia. At the time of the incident, her blood alcohol level exceeded 2.5%. indicative of severe intoxication with impaired coordination and a high risk of losing consciousness. At first glance, everything seemed to align. Caitlyn, heavily intoxicated, ventured outside searching for her phone, taking along the unfinished bottle of absinthe. She likely lost her balance, possibly while reaching for her gadget, fell, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and died from the injury and exposure. The bottle with blood traces lay near her head, and the smartphone, the reason she left the house, was found nearby. However, the investigation found this scenario too simplistic and staged. Experts confirmed the head injury was inflicted with the bottle beside the body. However, forensic analysis suggested that if she had fallen by herself, the bottle would likely have rolled away, not remained parallel to her head. Both Caitlyn's and her husband's fingerprints were found on the bottle, along with some smudged prints that couldn't be identified. The blood-stained napkins and the opened bottle of household cleaner discovered in the house led investigators to a different conclusion. Their theory, later presented as the primary and only plausible one in court, suggested the couple argued over Caitlyn's preoccupation with her subscribers. In a fit of anger, Jeff struck her with the bottle, causing a fatal injury. Panicking, he tried to stage an accidental fall, cleaning the blood in the house but failing to dispose of the evidence. Partially supporting this theory was the fitness app on Jeff's phone, which tracked his steps. According to the app, he was active around the house until midnight and again early in the morning before the police arrived, contradicting his claim of being asleep. The police speculated that he was attempting to conceal evidence during these times. A third person involved? The neighbor who discovered the body recalled during questioning that she saw a male silhouette on the doorstep of the house who quickly left in an unknown direction. She couldn't confidently assert whether it was Mr. West or someone else. In the dim, early dawn light, she also couldn't discern whether this person entered the house or not. This information intrigued the investigators, considering the deceased's popularity online. She had many male admirers who paid to view the revealing photos of Kitty Cat. Thus, a theory emerged suggesting the existence of an obsessed follower among her subscribers. Perhaps someone sought a personal encounter with Caitlyn and tracked her down, hoping for a closer acquaintance. The middle-aged homemaker did often receive messages from various men, sometimes with inappropriate proposals, but she maintained her distance. No explicit threats or harassment were found in the communications. A few particularly persistent fans, living in other states with solid alibis, were quickly ruled out as suspects. Nonetheless, footprints were found on the doorstep, not belonging to the homeowners. These prints vanished on the lawn, and their origin remained a mystery. Could Mr. West have harmed his wife? Neighbors, friends, and relatives described the couple as happy and thriving. Jeffrey was aware of his wife's unique online activities, but treated them as harmless fun. Meanwhile, their social circle was oblivious to Caitlyn's alter ego, Kitty Cat, just as most of her followers had no idea of her real-life identity. When asked if he had ever been violent towards his wife, Jeffrey firmly denied it, stating he loved her too much to ever harm her. However, arguments had become a frequent occurrence in their household. A particularly telling text exchange, dated January 12th, was found on their phones, where the couple argued heatedly. Caitlyn criticized Jeffrey for not matching her in vivacity and temperament, even suggesting they might be incompatible. Jeffrey remained the prime suspect, with forensic evidence and gathered details only indirectly implying his guilt. Notably, following his arrest, not only his parents but also his daughter and in-laws rallied in his defense, firmly convinced of his innocence and asserting he could never hurt his wife. Trial and verdict. After Jeffrey West's arrest, he was unable to afford the $500,000 bail set, which meant he had to stay in custody until his trial. This wait stretched almost 3 years. He was offered a plea deal, admitting guilt in his wife's demise in exchange for a reduced sentence. However, Jeffrey adamantly refused, maintaining his innocence. The trial, which commenced in November 2020, attracted significant media attention, in part due to Caitlyn's online notoriety. This publicity put considerable pressure on the judges and jurors. By this time, the possibility of a third-party involvement in that fateful night's events was no longer considered. The prosecution argued that all evidence pointed to Mr. West. They believed, in a fit of jealousy and under the influence of alcohol, he struck his wife with a bottle, causing fatal injuries. In a panic, they suggested, he staged the scene to mimic an accident, removing evidence from inside the house. Jeffrey's defense team contended that Caitlyn's death was indeed accidental, citing her extremely high blood alcohol levels as a factor affecting her balance and coordination. In a heartfelt testimony, Caitlyn's mother supported her son-in-law. She described her daughter as eccentric, but insisted Jeffrey loved her unconditionally and would never harm her. She also appealed to the court to consider their granddaughter Lola, who had lost her mother and stood to lose her father. On January 11, 2021, the jury returned a guilty verdict for involuntary manslaughter. Jeffrey was sentenced to the maximum of 13 years, considering time already served. Notably, had he accepted the plea deal initially offered, he might have already been free. All appeals by Jeffrey and his lawyers have, so far, been unsuccessful. Today, we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. This amazing country attracts tourists from all over the world with the opportunity to relax on snow-white beaches, as if descended from advertising brochures, to touch almost untouched by man-exotic nature, to taste the unique local cuisine, and of course, it is Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car. 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair, touched her plump lips, which like a powerful magnet attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom on the floor in a pool of blood lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She will be 16-year-old Esmeralda Reaches. Esmeralda Reaches Martinez was born August 23, 2006 in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Eligio Riscosti and Isabel Martinez Reaches. She grew up in a complete happy family, had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers and was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house. He introduced himself as a teacher and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding. The walk had to be cut short and she had to be brought back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Rich's death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following the violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. But who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk, supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police also sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, and some were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results of the forensic examination, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the phones of Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, but indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and a few hours later to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Morillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay. Because of the evidence collected against him, the prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Let me remind you that preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person, not as a punishment for a crime he or she has committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her. But no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily, and thinking it was a woman's cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to make her fall asleep. It was learned from one of the girls' cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her an audio message in the early morning hours asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." But unfortunately, the friend listened to the help recording too late. The next day, Esmeralda was found breathless on the floor of her bathroom, completely bloodied. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police and his home was searched a day later, during which the clothes he was wearing that night while out with his female students were seized. His cousin, who was the second man that night, Ruben Murillo, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There are many ambiguities in the investigation into the event. The prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation rather than making new speculations about an event that alarmed the public. The public demanded a quality investigation to find out the real cause of the young girl's death. Many felt that the obvious facts that were on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigation. This involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the very car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, which triggered the bleeding. The car was urgently requested by the authorities, but as it turned out, it was sold in a hurry by John Kelly's wife. The investigation believed that such a hasty sale of the car was a fact of hiding evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Paniagua Pillier. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Paniagua, who was the new owner of the car was finally inspected. But other than traces of blood that belonged to Esmeralda in the car, no other evidence was found. The court ruling determined that there was not enough evidence to keep J.C. Espinal Rijo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months. The prosecutor launched his own investigation and re-interviewed the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda, testimony that helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Murillo Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Otra Banda, Iguay, with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. It turned out that originally, the whole company was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and changed the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Macau beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer, and returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat, while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but it was noticed by one of the girlfriends. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and of course their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends as well. After a moment without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot where, according to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches's blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom at the gas station. They also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the facts. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that the girl had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestagen with contraceptive effects. When taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen, this component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher John Kelly was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the El Banal Public Cemetery. Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her. They described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4th, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches's life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12th, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin Rubiel Murillo Martinez with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Anamuya Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Higay. Rubiel Murillo Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for John eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm going to let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, "It is their turn to fight for justice." A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents are entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Agree. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle fear wins, taking precious life.